Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. This is Moina Bass Fishes. I am Jim Moina, professional bass fisherman, and I have been since 1995. All those years of experience is important for the topic of this video, and actually for a lot of my videos, but it's really important for this one because this has to do with basically tournament strategy. I'm a tournament bass fisherman, and this has to do with tournament strategy, and it's kind of a fundamental thing to take into consideration. So what we're going to talk about is when and when not to uh, try new fishing lures or new fishing techniques. Okay, that's an important thing. And the reason why this is my topic is because there's a certain trap that we can let ourselves fall into as a tournament angler, and that is um, you you don't want to get in a situation, or you don't want to be in a situation where you're trying these new techniques, new lures actually in competition or even in practice in a lot of cases. Um, and the reason why that is because you need to go with your confidence baits. You need to go with your strengths because that's what you understand. And as you eliminate water and understand what you're doing with baits you're accustomed to using, you're just that much more confident in eliminating water and establishing, the things that are working, the things that aren't working, and that sort of thing. Now, if you go into a tournament or in a tournament practice trying a brand new technique or brand new lure, you're not going to build on that confidence because unless if you immediately start drilling the fish, which case you will build that confidence. But in most practices go, especially in unfamiliar lakes, is we kind of struggle to try to um, first hone in on what's going on. So if we start out with a brand new technique that we're unfamiliar with, or a bait that we're unfamiliar with, and we start fishing and not catching anything, well, that's kind of erodes our confidence in that technique, in that bait. So that's for one. For two, we're not getting anything done because we're not really eliminating water because we don't know if we're really fishing the bait right, fishing it wrong. We really don't know. And so you're not really confident in actually the elimination of water. So it's not really doing any good. You're wasting time. And the longer you keep fishing this technique, the worse this situation gets. It just erodes on your confidence in this bait. You could have an absolute killer presentation or an absolute killer bait tied on at the end of your rod, but if the situation is not right, or you're fishing in the wrong places, well, you're not establishing nothing, and that's going to erode on your confidence. And that bait eventually might get cut off your line, put in the back of your box, and you just have a negative experience with that bait. When you pull that bait out again, who knows? It might sit in your tackle box for 2 years before you touch it again. And meanwhile, you've missed 2 years of prime opportunities for that bait. So that's why that. So really, that's just the kind of things that can happen. Now, so therefore, I suggest. Now, there's one exception to that rule. If you are practicing for like a team tournament and you got a second person in the boat, um, maybe the person in the front of the boat in practice is, doing something that's more traditional, something that you guys are familiar with. Maybe the guy in the back of the boat can be like, hey, okay, we know this is a crankbait, we're on a crankbait pattern, for example. Guy in the front's using the hot crankbait for you guys that you've always caught them on. Well, the guy in the back can then maybe try this new crankbait that you guys have been wanting to try. So then just see how he does. And then you can switch rods back and forth. So the guy in the front can be using the one rod with the traditional crankbait that's worked. Guy in the back can be using the new crankbait, see who's catching the fish, then swap. And this goes for not only just tournament practice, but even when you're fun fishing. And that kind of brings up the next point of when to do it, and that is when you are fun fishing, and when you have you can do it when you're fun fishing alone, but actually adding that second person is always it helps standardize what you guys are doing. If you can have one guy in the boat fishing the traditional standard technique and the other guy experimenting with the new technique or / lure, well, that just helps you just build confidence in what you're doing. And I've seen this happen time and time again. I mean, the most I ever learned is when I was practicing for or actually competing in a tournament, in a team tournament with my team tournament partner Joe Thrun, because we would always, in practice, we would experiment. Usually one guy would have a established bait tied on. The other guy would maybe be trying something new, something a little different. And that's how we were able to hone in on some patterns that really were killer patterns back in the day. We did really well on a lake called Rainy Lake in team tournaments for many years. And it was all this process of experimenting and eliminating stuff, and we just got things really tuned in for a while there. Of course, side note to that, when the smelt died off, it kind of changed a lot of things there, including how we had things dialed in. But anyway, so we're less dialed in now than we used to be. That's the point. Now, next point. You do want to, it's best to try new baits on lakes you are familiar with. So if you got a second person in the boat and it's fun time, it's downtime, you're not in a tournament, and you're on a lake you're familiar with, in a situation you're familiar with, that's like the prime situation. Okay, so if you're on a lake and because you've been there enough times, how the fish set up at different seasons of the year, and right where to go, the best stretches, the best points, the best humps, the best weed beds, and so on. If you know all that, then that's a great time to try out a new technique or a new bait, because you can go to those areas and just see how this new bait might work or this new technique might work. And then again, of course, if you got a second person in the boat, it just helps fine-tune that even quicker and faster, and gives you a little more reliability on what you're doing. It's always tougher to try out new baits if you're the only person in the boat, because if you go down a stretch of shoreline and catch 20 fish on a new bait, well, who's to say that if the bait you've always used in the past, who's to say instead of 20 you might have caught 25 or 30? Right? You don't really know. You had some luck on this bait, but you really don't know, was it better than what I normally use or not? So having that second person always helps. And it's always, learning new baits is always it's always a process. When I first learned the football jig, it took me a long time to dial that thing in, because nobody was doing it. There was very little literature, very little how-to information on it back in the day. I'm talking back in the early to mid 90s when I first picked up on it. And so I was going about it just trying to figure it out on my own for the most part, except, I had a little bit that I learned from the two fellows out west that put me on it. But how to apply it in Minnesota natural lakes was it was a big learning curve. So, and it took a while. It was a new bait, new technique. It took a while to dial it in, but when I dial it in, it worked well. So, anyways, what else I got on the list here? Another time. Okay, here's another situation. When fishing is really tough, really, that's not the time to be practicing, or that's not the time to be experimenting with new lures and new techniques. Tough fishing is tough enough to break down and establish what's working, what's not working, because you're just not getting enough bite opportunities. They're just not there. So in that case, I like to stick with what I know and not really try to learn a new technique on a tough lake and that's set up in a tough situation under tough conditions. If that should make sense, right? Um, and then obviously the day of a tournament is not a time when you want to be experimenting with a brand new technique or brand new lure. You know, that's just stick with what you know. If your buddy the night before said, "Hey, try this certain bait," in that case, maybe have it tied on a rod, but use your primary stuff initially, and just experiment with that supposed hot bait from your buddy. Experiment with that. Just maybe a little bit to see if it actually works for you or not. Because what works for one person may not always work for you, and that's a lot of that has to do with confidence. So that's why going into a tournament day, you just got to be fishing with what you know and what you're familiar with. It's usually generally not the best time to be playing with new baits and new lures, and that's just me. That's my experience with since 1995, since I started professional fishing, and then plus I fished locally in Minnesota before that in tournaments and that. So it's all those years of competition that has led me to these guidelines for when to experiment, when not to experiment. So we talked about the best time is your downtime, your fun time, not tournament fishing, not practice on a lake you're familiar with. You're familiar with how this lake's set up. You're familiar with how the fish are positioned, and we can't always have a second person in the boat, but if we can get a buddy to come along or whatever, that's always a great time to experiment with stuff. Avoid doing this and experimenting with techniques in practice. Doing it, and obviously in the competition on tough lakes or on lakes that you're unfamiliar with. Okay, only once if you're on a brand new lake, start out with your stuff and then progress to the stuff progress to the more experimental side of things once you get a feel for the lake you're on. So anyhow, that's what I came up with for this video. And what really brought this topic to mind was when I went to Rayburn this year for the first Bass Open of the year here in 2025. I've been to Rayburn quite a few times, so I had some familiarity with it. But then again, the lake seems to fish a little different each time. This time, the water seemed a little more dingy in some places than what I was used to, and I was trying to get the suspended bass on bait pattern going, and I just started right out with that, and I wasn't really getting it going very well. And it's a technique I do need to work on. I got some familiarity with it, but I'm a long way from being really good at it. And really, I fished with that just too long, and I didn't get anywhere with it. I didn't establish anything. I didn't, and meanwhile, it's just time wasted. So in the end, I'd like to go back to that lake, and I need more time on that lake to get. I've been there plenty of times, but to understand how to win there is something I'm not quite on top of. I've caught some big ones in practices, but just anyways, I'm kind of getting down another I guess rabbit hole is what they call it. But anyways, well, let's wrap this video up, and thanks for watching live. Well, no, I'm not live, but this video was recorded on a very windy day here in southern Missouri, and I'm on my friend's farm, and I got some farm work to do for him now. So yes, I am channeling my inner farmer this couple of weeks. It's been fun visiting, and it's fun to work the land. It's kind of fun to do. So anyhow, thanks for watching. Over and out.